Hello, hello, and welcome. My name is Shannon Stott, and I am your host this evening for Winning Black Resistance yesterday, today, and tomorrow. I it was just so nice to be at different tables and see everybody's energy. We have people cooking, we have people eating, we have people really like relaxing into talking about activism, which is very, very great. I love this idea of, you know what, in order to be an activist, in order to stand for something, I have to heal. I have to be me. So if you don't know, there is a chat to your right, and I would love just to hear from you. Just type in the chat where you are joining us from. I am joining you from Austin, Texas this evening. So where are you joining us from? What is the weather like? If you're worried, I'm okay. I have power and water. We are doing so well. Maryland, yes, those are my stomping grounds. I am originally from that area, so the DC area. My sister's still up there. Columbia, Maryland, San Diego, Washington, DC. What? Yes, this is great. You all are joining us from all over the place, and it's really, the weather is nice. Good, Ray. I'm glad the weather has been nice. I'm waiting for this spring to kick in. So this is good. This is a collective, right? As in, we are here for a conversation this evening, and we want to be sure that all of the thoughts that you have are legible and readable, and you can put them in. So use the chat just to say hello, and also to ask questions and make comments as we are having this conversation. I feel like I'm among family. So just to get us started, this is again Winning Black Resistance yesterday and tomorrow. We're talking about fighting for freedom and discussing the Black resistance in its many forms with two amazing social justice innovators, Esther and Makani. And before we bring them up, our discussion today has been thoughtfully crafted by PEACES Collective. An activist in her own right, Ikrama Muhammad is the owner of PEACES, a local handcrafted accessory and home goods company whose goal is to create sustainable markets and systems for handmade and recycled goods. PEACES Collective also contributes to human development through experiential learning, economics, and education. If you could please join me in welcoming Ikrama Mohammed to tell us more about the PEACES Collective, do so in the chat. Just give a warm welcome as she comes up and speaks to us for a little bit. Ikrama, hi.
Thanks. How are you?
I am so well. It's warming up over here. My heart is warm. That's all that really counts.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
And I'm glad to hear that people are eating and doing their thing, because these conversations a lot of times take place around the dinner table, around the family community gathering. And I'm just grateful for you all evening. I don't want to take up much time, but I did want to talk to you a little bit about the PEACES Collective. We're a 1C3 nonprofit organization, and we're a platform for makers, formerly local makers, but now that we're on the World Wide Web, we have people from all over. So, but we make handcrafted goods, and we use the proceeds to do programs and workshops and different things like that to benefit. It provides a modest income for makers, and it also supports local economies. So we're happy to do that. In the olden days, you remember when we could gather in the same room and socialize, laugh and drink and have a good time. We used to host a pop-up in Baltimore, Maryland on Park and North Avenue. And I really miss that, but I am grateful that we are able to continue our commitment to reach out to support our makers and to reach out to the community and even a broader community, because we are online with our new website, which is the peacecollective.org. So I want to, again, thank you for coming. I hope you will enjoy the talk. I hope you find something beneficial for you and for those that you love. I'd like to ask you to support the PEACES Collective by going to our site, and it's thepeacecollective.org, and you can just get more information, or you can by making a purchase or donating. I want to get to the conversation with these two powerful and beautiful sisters. And when I was thinking about this topic, it reminded me of a familiar quote by Frederick Douglass that said, "Power concedes without a demand. It never has and it never will." And then I found well, I won't say popular quote that says, "Those who profess to favor freedom and yet depreciate vegetation are men who want crops without plowing up the ground." So I think we're very blessed to have these two sisters here tonight to kind of lead us in a discussion about going forward and how we are striving for our freedom and equality. And I hope you enjoy. Thank you very much. Peace.
Thank you, Akrama. That was stirring that piece about our men who want crops without stirring up the ground is like shift. I'm already being shifted. So we're in the right place at the right time. We have two wonderful people to start and to lead us in this discussion. Makani Temba has spent 30 years supporting organizations, coalitions, and philanthropic institutions in developing high impact change initiatives. Higher Ground Change Strategies provides her an opportunity to support organizations working to make powerful, transformative, vision-based change. Welcome, Makani.
So glad to be here.
I'm so happy to have you. Everyone is happy that you are here. It's going to be an amazing time. And Esther Iverem is a multidisciplinary artist, writer, and independent journalist. She received her National Arts Journalism Fellowship at Columbia University and is the creator, producer, and host of On the Ground, Voices of Resistance from the Nation's Capital on Pacifica Radio, as well as the author of We Gotta Have It, 20 Years of Seeing Black at the Movies. Please welcome Esther.
Hi, it's Iverem. Iverem.
Yes, please tell me, you said, were you pronouncing your name?
Yeah, Iverem.
Iverem, thank you very much. Yes, correct me, Iverem, thank you.
Yeah, we forgot to rehearse that.
It's true, it's true. Listen, so we're here together, we're starting this conversation. This first question really is just to get us all warmed up. We're already active in the chat, and to keep us active in the chat, I want everyone, including the both of you, to answer this. What is something you do every day for yourself or others that you would count as activism or resistance? Just anything. You can put it in the chat, but Esther, what is something that you do?
It's like, you say that again? I didn't hear the question.
Sure. Yeah. What is something that you do every day for yourself or others that you would consider or count as activism or resistance?
Wow. I think that a lot of us, when we just get up every day in our purpose and set about to resist in so many ways, that we consider that resistance, that getting up and moving through the world determined to make it better is resistance. Yeah. But I think that, that gets to a lot of issues around self-care, caring for people, kind of resisting the dominant ideas about selfishness and kind of me. So I think that in an everyday level, I feel that type of energy to get up and do my work as a communicator and an artist is an act of resistance for sure.
Yeah, it's such. Ikrama is saying that she's agreeing. Yes, keeping up your natural hair. Absolutely. This is not a joke.
Right.
It was wash day today for me. I was like, oh, this is real life. Makani, same question?
I so agree with Esther. I mean, yeah, I guess I could say the fact that I don't dye my hair is my act of resistance, but I think truly care and centering. I was watching Kara Page, who is a leader and thinker around healing justice, and she was talking about how the colonial project basically wants us to disremember, to not remember.
Mm.
And which is so true, right? Like so much of our struggle each day is to remember, right? Remember our history. Part of our conversation today will be to maybe remind people of some things that they may have known or didn't know. And so to me, I feel like every time I wake up with my memory, I go by my altar, my ancestors are there, that feels like, yes, Black people remembering who we are, remembering and not being engaged in like that sort of, what is it, that sort of constant amnesia that this country through media and everything just sort of forces on us. I feel like that's an act of resistance. If you can remember you can remember your people, and and know a little history, you're doing pretty well. Yes.
Yeah, let's go ahead and start like down that conversation about history for the both of you. You touched on it, right? This ancestral history, things that we are trying to remember, things that people are trying to have us forget. What are some things that we need to remember about our ancestors that they were doing as activism that we either aren't considering activism or that period the end that we have to remember what they were doing? What are those things?
Well, one thing, I've been through mainly journalism, doing a lot of research and presentations, interviews around Reconstruction. And I know Makani and I got into an exchange on social media about this, but I wanted to bring up the amazing ways that people just a few years or even months out of enslavement made a new life for themselves. There was a town in South Carolina, and like, for example, on the border with Georgia, where an historian or a researcher told me it was very much like Tulsa, in that Black folks, like I said, just out of enslavement, built a wonderful life for themselves. They had their own shops, they were buying land, they were buying plots of land, and they were teachers, they opened schools to educate themselves. And this was, this created a lot of envy, among a lot of the poor whites who wanted to see Black people, as she said, under their foot. And so there were so many stories like that when I was looking at Reconstruction like that. And I know Makani, coming from Mississippi, and well, no, she's not. She's from Harlem. Let's be really clear.
Yes.
But she's living in Mississippi now, and she, like Mississippi had, like, all these Black elected officials, and really, the people were really moving forward to create a new life for themselves. Before the federal government really betrayed the recently freed population and allowed forces like the Klan and this group called the Red Shirts and, groups like that to basically terrorize the Black community and to take by force and violence so many of the things that they had done for themselves. And I don't really want to think of it as a defeat, as a story of defeat. I want to think of it as an example of what you were talking about people who, as we just said a few minutes ago, made a new world for themselves out of nothing. They didn't get any 40 acres and a mule. They didn't get any of those things promised, but with, nothing but dirt, really being up from the soil, made new lives for themselves.
I would agree. I think that's really important. During Reconstruction, and I want to talk about post-Reconstruction as well, but during Reconstruction, Mississippi had the most progressive constitution in the country. in a place like Mound Bayou, Mississippi, folks came from all over, not only the country, but the world, to see how Black people govern themselves. And this actually lasted past Reconstruction into the early 20th century. Actually, Mound Bayou was still functioning 60s and 70s. And so I think both things are important. The history of how we resist and make things happen, but also how the state, and I mean that in terms of government entities and these quasi-state and sort of vigilante extensions of the state are really the reason why we have not gotten farther. Because I think part of the story is that people think, well, Black folks, man, the reason so many people I talk to think the reason why Black people don't have more as a community is because of what we do to each other, right? And so you hear that story about like, yeah, man, Black people just can't get together, blah blah blah. And so what gets erased is these really centuries, right, of terror, of repression, of violence, and I don't mean just guns and ropes, right? But I'm talking about like the violence that happens in school when you don't learn about yourself, like the violence that happens when you go to try to get to a doctor and that doctor decides that you don't really matter, or they're not going to offer you whatever the best possible treatment is, like for COVID or things like that. So that because those dual stories that nothing really happened great, and and that happened because, or didn't happen because of what we do. And that it almost reminds me of like every who hollers, like from Horton Hears a Who. It's like the story is, if every single Black person does not get together, then we fail, right? And that Horton Hears a Who framework, right, is so deep, right? So then, because that is a part of our self-blame. So I think that's why telling these stories of victory, and many of which still last today. I mean, there's clinics that were founded in Mississippi during Reconstruction and later that still exist and still serve people and still controlled by Black folk, and not just in Mississippi, that are still standing, and we have heroes, people who resisted with weapons and lived and died in their sleep. Right. So I think that telling those stories is just very critical to our, not only our knowledge, but our well-being.
Yeah, I'd like you both to could almost loop around. So we're sort of circling around this topic of, we started with this self-care, right? And what you're talking about, Makani, that's interesting to me is there is a narrative that tells us if every Black person doesn't get together, then we can't make anything happen. And that is why we're failing. But at the beginning of this conversation, we talked about how it is activism to get up. It is activism to take care of yourself. It is activism to walk through the streets with your natural hair. Those things are activism. Can you just talk to us about what you would tell someone who thinks of activism as holding the sign, right? We march, we must, if I don't march, if I don't shout, if I don't make something so that people are coming together, then I'm not doing enough. What do you tell those people?
I always tell people that there's room for everything in our movement. That's good, right? Not not like ignorant, crazy stuff. But if somebody wants to drop off a pound cake, like I have a gluten allergy, but if you want to drop a pound cake off for other folk, I'm like, bring that pound cake, right? If you want to have signs up, right? Because we need all of it. The people who write the songs, the people who paint the paintings, all of it. And I think what I love about movement today and is that there's more making room. We have people twerking for liberation, right? And I'm just like, go ahead, get it, right? Like it's to me, I just love the way we're broadening that. I'm a child of the 60s. And so it was in many ways, not all of it was was a harsh culture, but there was a lot of it that had a level of martyrdom and a little bit of harshness to it. Not everybody did that. I want to be clear. It's not a monolith, but there's some ways in which people sort of make a cartoon of movement and say, well, you know, what it is people with leather jackets just, you know, talking hard and doing hard things when and one of the things, especially in the South, you learn is how much it is about family, how much it is about making that space for whatever gifts people had. If you could teach someone to read, come teach someone to read so they can learn how to pass their ballot test. And, you know, it's like shout out to ancestors like Septima Clark and folks like that who just came with a heart. So I think anybody who comes with a heart to make a difference, like that's how breakfast programs started. That's how, you know, all those things that I think are really critical came from folks just showing up with their gifts.
Yeah, Esther, I see you nodding. I feel like I feel like you have.
Oh yeah. So I think that when I look at some of the groups that have emerged during Black Lives Matter, one of the things I really like about them is the variety of creative ways that they express their activism. So they do include artists, they do include, you know, singers and poets, and you know, I follow some of their work here in DC, and some of it I can't actually broadcast. I have to like do some edits, you know, but it's you know, it's a way of showing a kind of creativity that hasn't really been kind of named yet. Like no one's called it like the new Black cultural movement or anything like that. It's just really a part of the movement. And I think it's a way of, like Makani said, like giving everyone a chance to play a part and to contribute whatever they can. And I think that one of the things that I do think is important is to be a part of some type of organizing. You know, I don't want us to leave the conversation with the idea that, well, I'm just an individual and I'm going to make an individual contribution. Yeah, that's okay. If that's what you can do in your space, that's I'm not going to, you know, put that down. But I just think that things are so critical that if we can find like-minded people who care about the same things that we care about, be it could be just your neighborhood. You know, they might be trying to build an incinerator or a dump, or, you know, build a polluting factory or something in your neighborhood. Things that people don't really think of as a sign, you know, the sign, Black Lives Matter, you know,
Right.
but you know, it may be something it could be a store that's like selling those, like, you know, what they call like bubblegum flavored cigarettes, or all these different kinds of you know, artificial, you know, weed to our kids. That's like whacking you know, a lot of people are really getting strung out on that stuff. And so it could be anything. It could be any way that you want to support, you know, even elders in your community, helping people, especially right now where, you know, the government has so failed us in terms of, you know, food, you know, insecurity, transportation, you know, just anything, just even maybe just being able to spend time with somebody to see if they're okay, because a lot of people are isolated, and it's so frightening to think about, you know, in a situation like this where people may not even have the ability to call someone to say, I need help. So, I mean, I welcome all that. And I think all of that is organizing and activism. And it's just to the point where we have, in so many ways, the pandemic has showed us that we really have to rely on ourselves. And, you know, development of all these different mutual aid groups and people who are really trying to do work on that level has shown us that. So I think that, you know, can really expand our definition of what activism is and really push back on people who, I don't know what the word I want to call it, but a lot of people consider themselves activists really discourage people from being active because they have a real self-righteous attitude about what activism is. And you have to kind of agree with their line about everything. Like, I was really very discouraged around people trying to create almost like a division in the movement around people saying, defund the police versus community control of the police. And when I really looked at the documents from a lot of the people from Defund the Police, they had that in their documents that they believed in community control of the police. But just because they didn't lead with that with their first foot, people were like, oh, well, we are more correct because we believe in community control of the police, and we're in the legacy of the Panthers, and we're in the legacy. I'm like, come on, we don't have to create these divisions among ourselves when we all want the same things. We want these cops, we want killer cops jail, we want them prosecuted, we want them to stop killing us, and if they do anything that is against the law, we want them prosecuted just like anybody else. We don't want them hiding behind qualified immunity and these types of things. So that's just an example of, I just think that we can do a lot when we talk to each other instead of trying to like pose like, we're correct and, the other person's not correct because they're not being an activist the way we're being an activist.
I'm wondering if both of you can share in that way this idea, the question being, can you share sometimes that you have been brought very low because of activism, that activism feels like you want to either give it up or step away from it, and then also share some times where you've been brought high, that you've seen change, so that we get a balance. What does it look like being on your side? What does it look like being an activist?
I could start, and what I'd like to start is a little bit of a segue from what Esther shared. One, as much as I absolutely agree that some people can be petty, around things and worried, and I also, because compassion and context is everything. The older I get, the more compassion I have for, you have folks who've been out here doing this work for a long time. Their ego's really invested, that, they're not getting paid, they're getting kicked around, and then they're mad, they're like, well, wait a minute, like, and then also the natural way that innovation works is you learn from other people, right? We go further faster when people are together learning things, and you learn from what they learn and you innovate on that. And movements like that too, right? So sometimes somebody could be, working in the vineyards forever doing a thing, and then somebody breezes by you, takes a little bit of what you've been doing and add a little something else, and then your feelings are hurt because you're like, well, it's like it's almost like filling a bathtub with a cup, and you've been filling the bathtub, and you're filling the bathtub, and you're filling the bathtub, and you almost got a bath, and then somebody runs by and they got a bucket, but you basically have put 10 buckets in the tub, but they got one bucket but you've been doing it cup by cup, so you feel some kind of way, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that there's times when we can feel sad and low, right? About like when we work hard, when we're not seen, when people, diss us, and we can, feel some kind of way. But and I think the flip side of that is criticism is important. Like a movement cannot live. It dies if people don't feel like they can engage in critical conversation and be like, well, actually, maybe community control isn't a thing. Maybe we're trying to like abolish. Maybe we are abolitionists. Like, and so some people might be a little mad because even though they might believe the same thing, and they didn't feel like they had the space to express it that way 50 years ago, right? Mm. And the reason why somebody can call themselves an abolitionist now is because of the work they did 40 years ago or something like that. And so we've got to find this place between like being able to engage in critique and sharpen and refine and build and expand our vision, because of the ways in which all of our work opens the space up, but also honor. Like, don't get it twisted. Honor like why you get to have the analysis that you have, right? So I think having that maturity and that compassion, and also the fact that people are like walking around here all stressed out and trauma, and it used to not be social media, right? So you'd be mad, you call somebody and cuss them out, and it would just be between the two of you, right? And maybe you might be wrong, or maybe you might be at a meeting and cuss them out. But you go up on Twitter and cuss them out, right? And you just cuss them out in front of millions of people, right? And then people take so we're also like in a place where everything is amplified, right? And in a way, so our critiques, our things, so that might have been at a meeting is now played out in public. And then that story that we're carrying in our bones about the reason why we're not free is because Black people don't get along, then gets really played out, right? in writ large. And so I think those things can really bring us down, when we're looking at that, and we're carrying some piece of that story, and we're trying to work out the compassion, but you're also annoyed, when people don't have good, kind of home training, right? Which plays out straight up on the internet, on social media, but also when it all comes together, right? When you've put in time, and I like movement for Black Lives feels like that for me right now, where it's like, I watched many of those folks as organizers when they were young, and as they mature and they're moving, and they built this thing that is really the largest modern day movement. We have seen millions and millions of people took to the streets this summer, and it was not impromptu. Let me be clear. People organized that. They got in there. They were calling folks. They were, moving organizations and engaging and taking everything they learned, right? And then learning on the fly too, right? To have this reaction, right? And you had groups like Surge showing up for racial justice, organizing white allies. So when you watch it from afar, it looks like just people showed up, they were upset, and that's the other story. Like Rosa Parks wasn't an organizer; like she just showed up and sat on a bus.
Right.
All these things, just plucking people out of their context, right? So anyway, just to put a pin in it, just that it's like, but when, as an organizer, when you see it come together, even if the people don't always get credit, even if they try to make it all like some kind of cute little story of folks who just were upset and just showed up that day, is that if people leave here with nothing else, just know that an organizer did that a bunch of organizers did that, and that is part of the story, that when something goes bad, then all the organizers end up being shown, and they're in the media and everything else. But when a whole bunch of things happen and it's good, then people try to strip out the organizing and act like it's something impromptu.
Well, Shannon, I thought about one particular thing, because you were talking about, things that may have brought us low. And I think that working in the space as a writer and an artist, I've had certain experiences. I had a career at one point in corporate media, my last, and when I left the Washington Post, for example, it was because I had done this piece on Paul Robeson. And try as I might, I could not, get, past these editors with this piece. And the main editor of the style section said to me, well, Esther, Paul Robeson wound up on the wrong side of history. And basically your piece needs to reflect that, And so that wasn't going to happen. And so, even though it was very counter to my kind of depression era parents. I left my good job, and and the thing is, when you talk about disappointments, I think that those of us who I don't know, had the opportunity to reap some benefits from the civil rights movement, post civil rights generation, all of us had choices to make. And the thing is, when you talk about disappointments, because we're all like junior elders now. I don't want to go full fledged.
Yelders.
And so we all had choices to make, and I think that some of the disappointments come from seeing the world in the state that it is, and understanding that so many other people who didn't care about those choices, who because at some point I remember very clearly that it wasn't really a decision that I would ever be a cop. You know what I mean? But I have to be in a space now where I am, and I'm feeling what Makani's talking about, and being older and having compassion. I don't actually have antagonism like a lot of younger people do toward cops. You know what I mean? I don't, because I understand that the society is basically funneling people into the military or into law enforcement. In many cities, that's really the only job you can get. I have a poem where I talked about that. In DC, that's the easiest job to find, right? Because what I saw in my lifetime was basically the world that I trained to be in, journalism, basically, deteriorate, so that, none of the Black people I know who were working in journalism writ large are really working there anymore. I have a few friends who with Ivy League degrees who they're still hanging in there. And they are, they've been sent up the pole and they have these big executive positions. I just saw somebody on TV the other day. I said, "What? Really? You got that job?" But the point is, the point I'm trying to make is that in terms of disappointment, that it comes sometimes on a personal level, but I don't think I feel it in terms of the movement, because we want to maintain revolutionary optimism. We want to feel, we want to know that the work that we're doing is sometimes the only difference between, our defeat and our ability to keep going. And so I feel like information, and when people can use information as a tool, when they can hear media and facts, that counter, this kind of destructive narrative out here, that's a victory. And so I have to count that as a victory. And so, I think that, battling narratives and creating narratives that help us to survive is very important. And so that's part of my work. So, following Akrama's good example at the beginning, I will say that On the Ground News Productions is a 501c3 organization, and we are always looking for people to support us. But we also have a site on Patreon where our listeners can be subscribers. So if they go to patreon.com/On the Ground Show, they'll see us there, and they'll see all our shows. Because even though we're broadcast on about 24 radio stations now, and we have our podcast, that Pacifica model is very much about slavery. So it's not like I'm paid to be on all those stations. I'm basically helping them raise money, even today. So I want to make that part of the activism too, because we don't like to ask, right? If you grew up the way I did, it was like, we don't ask. No, we know I got this. I'm not asking for anything. And so we want to ask for people to support us, and realize that it's solidarity. That's what we're asking for. We're asking for solidarity. So I hope that we come out of this meeting with the idea about solidarity with each other, and to support the things that we can in any way that we can, in terms of our time, a few dollars, $3, whatever it is. It can be very encouraging to the next person who is trying to do the work.
I'm going to ask you both this. So we've we're like conversating, and I want to know what, as an activist, what is a question that you get all the time, and can you answer it? And what is the question that you wish you got, and can you answer that?
Say it again. You're so profound. I have to. I need to absorb that some more.
As an activist, what is a question that you get all the time, and will you answer that? And then versus what is a question that you wish you got, and will you answer that?
Oh, wow. That question that I get.
And this is for both of you, Makani, as well.
I'm sitting here percolating like, go again.
But I wish I could. Well, you know, this may not be appropriate, but
it's in. Do it. That's why we're here.
So one question, one thing I think is that I think that people, and it comes out of this whole statement I was making around choices that people make, because people basically want to survive. I mean, we live in a capitalist country that that rates all of us by our possessions, by you know, all that stuff, right? And that's one reason why they're able to keep control over us, because you know, we don't want to be that person in the homeless shelter, right? That everyone is like walking, you know, we don't want to be that person on the street. And so it's a way that they keep in control over our minds and our actions and our fears, because, you know, you're going to keep that crappy job and have that manager treat you like crap because you need that job, and you need that job because you need to pay your rent, you need to buy food, you need to take care of your children, because these things aren't human needs. They're not given to us as human needs like they are in socialist countries where people, they don't, you know, nobody in Cuba after a storm doesn't have electricity and water and is freezing to death. I mean, well, they're in Cuba anyway, right? So not freezing, but still, right? I mean, these are the things that they do to keep control over us. And I've kind of lost my thread, but I'll get it back.
Well, actually, here and this is me, like this is Shannon. So this idea of living in this narrative, right? So for instance, I'm sitting here in Austin, Texas. Thank you to the creator that I have my lights on, and we do have heat today, right? But there is, how does one balance the idea that there is another narrative? There's a narrative out there that puts us down, like that, right? That keeps us in a space of, I have to be in this job. If I'm not in this job, I can't keep my lights on. If I can't keep my lights on, I can't feed my children. And then at the same time, the government, right? We have this storm, and there are lots of people still without power, still without food, still without clean water in Austin, Texas, in the United States of America. Anyway, but I am wondering, how do you change someone's idea that it is on them to keep their lights on, their water clean, and there's nothing that they can do as far as activism that's going to change a government?
Well, that's what we have to, that's our challenge. That's our challenge. To me, I feel like that's our challenge, to let people know that another world is possible, that we can have another society where it is not, you know, a single mother isn't left, you know, with no food in a dangerous situation, and her child is in a dangerous situation because it's somehow her fault. And that we have to think of public resources and the public and the commons differently, because all that money that's out there, that's our money. You know, and I'm thinking, I'm hearing Makani in my ear, because one time I interviewed her, because people were like, kind of like sometimes a side eye, because she basically got a lot of money from these foundations and was able to really help a lot of organizations. And they were, you know, like, oh, you know, the revolution will not be funded, whatever. But she said, you know what, wait a minute, that's our money. You know, Rockefeller, Carnegie, the Mellons, all those people, that's our money. You know, any money, if you're going through Gulfport, Mississippi, and all those mansions lining the coast, or where they used to before Katrina washed them away or whatever. I mean, that's our money, right? So, you know, I think that the challenge is to let people know that another world is possible, that the whole capitalist paradigm that we've been brought up under is dying. You know, this empire is dying. That's why you have we're operating under a failed state, where you can have things like Texas happen, where you have people in Flint who still don't have clean water, where you have a Boeing airplane over the weekend shedding parts over Colorado, and you have commentators like being an apologist for Boeing, that's, you know, this defense contractor that's killed like hundreds of people with planes crashing. So this whole paradigm is burning and it's dying, and we have to let people know that another world is possible, and we have to be organized together to make that happen. We can't do it as individuals, thinking that it's our job to keep our lights on, thinking that it's our fault, right? And that's what they do. They think it's your fault that you got a $16,000 electric bill. No, these people are criminals. These people are criminals. Electricity is it should be a public utility. You know, heat, electricity, and your lights being on, even broadband, internet should be a public utility. You know, because you need the internet basically to survive now. Your children need it to go to school. You need it to be a student. So we have to just, we have to rearrange society, and whatever, by any means necessary, as Malcolm said, we have to change these structures that right now are not serving us and that are robbing us. You know, power to those women in Bessemer, Alabama, who are on strike at Amazon. You know what I mean? That's what we mean when we have to confront these systems of power that are strangling us, because we this can't last. This can't last the way it is.
Makani and Esther, you're talking about another world is possible. Idris is like, yes, another world is truly possible. And Makani, you're saying that you've written about this. Just enlighten us a little bit.
Well, I mean, you know, Esther nailed it. I mean, I think that we've had an interesting debate as Black people for centuries over whether or not we should petition and push the government to give us our due. And some people are like, well, forget it. You know, we just need to build it all, but we don't have the option of not sending them our tax dollars. So, I mean, you know, some people don't do it, but still, right?
And they be in jail,
right? Right? Unless you have a lot of money, then no. But and you owe a lot of taxes. So we're
in jail.
Yeah. So sometimes. So you end up in this kind of conflict when it's really a both and. We have to build alternatives, and we have to fight for what's ours. You know, almost 90% of Black kids are in public schools. That's probably not going to change. And so our schools need to treat our children with respect, and they need to educate them, right? It doesn't make sense, and it's not even just the public sector. It doesn't make sense that you can go, for people who are in the area, you can go to one Safeway, you know, on Georgia Avenue, and you know, near Silver Spring, and it looks like one way, right? And then you go to another Safeway in the hood, and it looks another way. It's the same chain. You know, there shouldn't be a ghetto Safeway and a good Safeway, right? And so there's all of these ways that and you know, we go back to this idea of like, what is organizing really, right? Organizing is demanding and being strategic about moving in such a way where you win the things that are important for your dignity, your survival, and your joy, right? And that the biggest part of it is that we've got to believe we deserve it. And that's the story, you know, and it's not just and unfortunately, it's not just a narrative in the way we think of it. It's not just something that people say to each other, but it's reinforced when you watch film and you watch, I thought it was so interesting, the work by Entman and Rajecki that was a research on who was most likely to get beat up in film. And Black women were more likely to be hit or punched than even Black men in film. And I thought, that's so profound, right? It's like, what does it teach you about who you are and what to expect in life? And not to mention just like how it gets played out and how people discipline their children, and just all the ranges. So I think that part of it is that stepping out into that place of imagination, that decolonized place where we're like, I can imagine myself free. I can imagine myself beyond problems. And in fact, I mean, the project that I'm working on right now is really about trying to support works that's about helping people see that, imagining themselves, and not in like a super sci-fi way where you can't even recognize yourself or your clothes, but like, so it's not that far in the future. But it's like, we have work to do to be in that place of imagining. I mean, that's the power of Afrofuturism. And I think in even some ways Afro-pessimism, right? Because it's like, what do we have to dig out of to get there? But how do we imagine this future? But also, how do we know that how do we also know and learn about places like Mountain Bayou, about places like Blackdom, which is my favorite Black liberated space that was in Arizona, right? And I'm sorry, not Arizona, New Mexico. And you think, Black people were like, we're stopping right here, and we're gonna create this place in the desert, and it lasted for many decades, actually. So we have this long history that where we have imagined and built together and made these communities. And I did reference the chapter in Jackson Rising where I write about some of these places. That this is a part of our legacy. We are not only dreamers but builders. We can imagine, and imagination is critically important. There's a book that is the only one of John Steptoe's book, who is a famous children's author, that's out of print. All the rest of his books are in print, but this one. And it's a book called Birthday. And I may walk up because it's not too far from where I'm sitting and just kind of show it on camera. But it's a children's book that was about the life of the Black nation once we're free. And it's a beautiful book. And it's and basically the book is around the 8th birthday celebration of the first child born into freedom. And when I first saw that book, I was maybe 11 years old, I think, when it came out, maybe 10. My mom had bought it. And then I decided, and I had the version that my mom bought back in the 70s. And then I bought like maybe 3 more copies of it for my children, right, who are now in their 30s. And so it's like we do have a memory deep in our bones, an ancestral memory, and also in many ways a current memory of freedom, of being free. And I also want to talk about the difference between freedom and liberation, because they're not the same thing, right? And so freedom, a lot of people talk about freedom, and this is critical because you want to feel free. You want to be free. You want to be in your body free. You want to live that life, right? And then liberation is about that collective. Like sometimes you're not quite as free because you're trying to build a collective liberation. So there's things you're going to do, like as an organizer, or like it may be your turn to dig the ditch, or whatever that is that we do collectively so that we can have liberation together. And that part of our imagining, right, is that there's a story that whenever we get together, there's trouble, there's, bossiness, there's, dysfunction. And And so I think why it's at least important to me to tell these stories about these communities where Black people governed together for so long, right, is that these were places that actually happened without much mishap, right, without a whole lot of tension, where people were able to love up on each other, and that is part of what we inherit as well.
Mm-hmm. I have it's not formulated, so excuse me, but do you think, I'm listening to you talk about freedom versus liberation, is there a definition of freedom that slaves had, that our ancestors had, that is different than our definition of freedom? And is our definition of freedom now small?
I'm gonna let you go first, Esther.
I don't know. I mean, it's such a big question. It's a collective, and you know, there's certain things that we can't really answer as a we and our.
I see Akrama with I feel like Akrama's fist is up. Yes.
And I don't discount the terror of enslavement, and so therefore I um I think that the idea of people being enslaved, um, they they had the right idea about freedom. They knew that they did not want to be enslaved anymore, and that's really a really big thing. I remember when the brother made the movie about Nat Turner, and that was such a cluster. I mean, I found myself defending the film. Somehow he was denounced because of this incident of, he was accused of rape in college, and you know, that all came out, and that all came out as a battering ram against him and the film. And I found myself in a space where there is these women talking about him and the film like the devil, and and him calling him a rapist. And I said, well, something, I said, in the film, what he's talking about is when our rape wasn't even considered a crime. And can you imagine a girl growing up when she thinks that that's her job? That's her job every day, to be raped. She doesn't really know any other reality. Like, that is what she wakes up and a man comes and rapes her. And that's her job. So I said, and they looked at me like they didn't really think about it that way. And so I don't discount the horrors of enslavement and what it really meant, and the scars that people carried for so long and that people still carry. And not just Black people, but white people. I think that the whole society was changed because people could be murdered and raped and killed, and it wasn't a crime. Mm-hmm. So that's why the society is the way it is. That's why, white women aren't safe. They're not safe because you had a society here where it was legal to torture, rape, maim, and murder a human being, and it wasn't a crime because that person was property, or that person was and so I think when they thought about freedom, I think that it was an amazing thing to think of, and I don't want to belittle that at all. And now I don't even know how Black people writ large, I don't know how we think about freedom. I think we think about things that we would like to change. We would like, like a lot of people were just commemorating 1 year of Ahmaud Arbery being shot and killed. And so many young Black men were talking about how it affected their ability to jog. It affected their ability to feel free in spaces. And, I've had, because of my work, I've had experiences with these white supremacists in this area. But I refuse to be in a mental space where I don't feel free to walk and be, you know what I mean? But so many people are feeling that they don't feel that freedom. They don't feel that freedom to just walk and be in a space, maybe even alone, because of the real terrorists out here, right? And so I think that when people talk about freedom, they want the freedom to live that life they see on TV, where everybody's happy, they don't have a care in the world, they're like living on a beach in California. They're not worrying about jogging. They're not worrying about jogging on the beach. They're not worrying about jogging down the road. You see people all the day, they're not worried about that. But these young Black men, they were talking about that, And so when you have those kind of constrictures on your mind and even on your physical capacity or what you think is your ability to move in space, that is against freedom. That is not freedom. And so I think a lot of people want the ability to just to be. They don't want this legacy of this yoke around us of this the racist terror that we are subjected to on a daily basis, either mentally, physically, emotionally, that baggage that people carrying around, even subconsciously. So me.
Totally agree with that. I would totally agree with that. I think that is a beautiful and also clear and hard right way in which how people are rolling with this. And even in spite of this, I think about how people experience Black Panther. And it was a trip. Now, I'm a comic book head. Doug, I wasn't one of those people who just discovered Black Panther. I was one of those people who used to get the Fantastic Four comics when I was a kid and watch Black Panther in there. And then when Black Panther got its own, so I wasn't new by any stretch of the imagination. But I loved watching how people responded to it, right? And even with all the terror and all the stuff we have in our bodies, ancestral and present day. I mean, I have a son who's over 6 feet tall, right? Who you spend most of their, kind of teenage life hoping praying they get home, especially when they start driving, right? Like you just don't even realize how much of that tension you carry in your body, right? And when he turned 30, I was like, there was something in me that just felt like, whew, like maybe I can stop worrying, right? But I think that even in spite of all that, right, how quickly and how lovely we went in that movie theater, and that wasn't even a perfect thing. I mean, Black people were still killing each other, right, and doing all kinds of things, right?
But they were doing this, right?
And I saw, it's like the day it premiered, I was actually with a group. I was at a Movement for Black Lives meeting, so we went in a crew, and we dressed up. We painted our faces. We started people chanting and singing. We were in Atlanta, so we were like in the hella blackity black places in the movie, right? And Black people were going. You couldn't even find African clothing in the West End because people were buying it up so they can go to Black Panther dressed up in their idea of what they thought, being African was. And I'm gonna tell you, people were fly. They came into that movie fly. Maybe never wore no African-ish before. They were fly, right? And so it was packed, and we started. There's a song that Black Youth Project 100 sings that's I Love Being Black.
Yeah.
And so we were singing that, and then people were like, "We want to learn the song." We registered people to vote. You know, it was like a moment, right? It's like we were like Wakanda the vote, and
The vote.
well, that was a thing, a movement for Black Lives thing, right? So, you know, shout out to Jessica Bird, Raquel Lumumba, and Kayla Reed, right, who put that together. But it's like, what I saw over that period was that no matter how much stuff we went through, we could snap into that. We could snap into a place of imagination, like just like that, right? Like we could snap into a place of joy, just like that. You know, maybe not last, but, and I was like, wouldn't it be amazing? That was actually, you know, even though I had been talking about imagination and writing about radical imagination and all of that for like literally decades and why it's important and community, all of that. But sitting in that movie, and I saw the movie 6 times, just in different parts of the country, just to see how other people were reacting to it, just because I wanted to see other Black people react to it. That I was like, Disney and Marvel should not be the primary space where Black people are imagining themselves free. Like we need to fix that a little bit. No shade, because the folks who put Ryan, all those guys, amazing work. And we need more spaces like that. So, you know, we need our schools to promote that, learn the history, but also like our children, like when I was in the 2nd grade, we used to literally sing, I'm gonna jump down, turn around, pick a bale of cotton. Jump down, turn around, pick a bale a day.
What?
Oh Lordy, pick a bale of cotton. Oh Lordy, pick a bale a day. Like that was something we were actually taught to sing and do. Right. And
I didn't know that song.
that's good. I'm just saying. And I was in Harlem. I was in Harlem at PS 28. We had a red, black, and green flag at our school, right? You know, some people don't know about Iceberg Slim, but Iceberg Slim and Nikki Giovanni were Black History Month speakers. That Iceberg Slim probably shouldn't have been, but Nikki Giovanni for sure.
Wow.
So I'm just saying it was a pretty Black space, even though it was a public school, and people did actually organize to stop the singing. My mom was my first organizing teacher, and she was like, "Y'all doing what?" And then they just like went and dealt with it, right? But it was a thing. It was a thing until somebody stopped it. So I feel like, yep, come on now, no clue, right? Come on, Robert. So it's like a lot of us grew up with that experience. And so what would it look like for our children to learn songs about freedom and feel free and see themselves, you know, and sing that BYP song, you know, I love the color, I love the texture of my hair. I rock it everywhere, like to sing those songs. And we can.
I want
Leslie, my homie from, we've been friends since 2nd grade. Yes, Marian Anderson too. Yes, came to PS 28. Sadly, I stabbed her because my job was to pin a corsage on her, and I stabbed her slightly. And because I was 7 and I didn't know any better.
Well, they shouldn't have a 7-year-old. That's not your fault. They shouldn't have a 7-year-old
pin anything on anyone.
It's so true. But it was a beautiful moment. We had a very Black school. So I have a friend here in the space. We went to elementary school together. So, you know, she remembers.
Good. We are wrapping up, and you have sort of led us down a path that I want to keep going down in wrap up. We talked about our ancestors. So, you know, today we are here, we're talking about winning Black resistance yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And we talked about our ancestors. We talked about yesterday. We talked about even a yesterday that is closer to us than our ancestors. We've talked about today, the Black Lives Matter movement, what we're doing as activists, how we're taking care of ourselves, what we need to do. And Makani, you're starting to talk about the tomorrow. And for the both of you, as a sort of a closing question, in the context of this conversation, what is it that you wish for?
Well, I wish for, and not just wish for, but I work for a new society and a new system. I wish for a society where the common human needs of people are taken care of, and we don't have to work as if those things should not come to us naturally. Clean water, clean air, a home, healthcare is a human right. People should not be in debt for being sick. People should not be in debt for having electricity. These things are crimes.
That's
and
right.
So I wish for and work for a new society, a new world. And I have my show on the ground on Pacifica and podcast, but also contribute to another show called the Socialist Program, which is a podcast. And they start the show every week saying, we need a new system. And that's exactly what we need. We need a new system. And a lot of the things that we are concerned about that terrorize us would not exist if we controlled our own society and then made the rules about, what would happen and how people would be treated as human beings and how we would treat the earth and the animals and everything.
Absolutely. I mean, I shade all of that. Akrama started with quoting from Frederick Douglass' famous speech, "What to the slave is 4th of July." And, every year I produce a community reading of that speech. It's actually a 3-hour speech.
Wow.
And, there's and I want to encourage people to read the whole thing, because it's pretty amazing. And he talks about church and all the people who are complicit. And it's oppressing folk, and being oppressed is a combination of its systems, and then it's the way we're transformed by those systems to participate. So I think, in addition to everything Esther says, I think what I hope and I dream of is a place where we feel connected as beings, as human beings, as the rest of the earth. Like, we understand that we're interconnected, because we are, right? It's like our brains are wired for connection. That's why we flinch when we watch somebody get hurt, because our brain actually thinks it's us. And it takes a lot of interrupting and programming, right? For people to disconnect from that. You have to disconnect from yourself to hate somebody else and to perpetrate violence against someone else. So that love and connection is really who we are. And that's what I hope we return to, right? And I think when there's a combination, right, of that systems and that love, that help reinforce it. So here we go.
Thank you so very, very much. Please put in the chat just how much you've loved this, because I've loved it so much. Esther, Makani, thank you for being here. If you're in the chat right now and you're just blown away and you're wondering what else can I do? Where else can I go? What more can I consume? The next event is on March 17th, 2021 at 7 p.m., depending on where you are. So join us for a panel discussion on Black women in the arts and their influence and impact on our culture, with special guest Tammy Lawson, curator, art and artifacts division, and Deidre Harris Kelly, Arts Administration.
Yes.
Yeah.
We love Deirdre.
It is going to be amazing. So be sure to be there. For now, I hope that you've been inspired to take your next steps in your own personal journey of activism. And we are going to go back to the room, to the conference room, and you can talk to both of our speakers there. I'm in tears and very happy. So hopefully you will stick around and you can talk to Esther and Makani. Otherwise, have a great evening, a blessed evening. Obviously, join the PEACES Collective, go and register and support the PEACES Collective. Thank you so much and good night.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Shannon.
You did a
Of
great
course.
job.
Yes.
You did a great job.
Shannon. Yay.
We did it. We did it. We did it. Hooray.